I used to have a small apartment 2 blocks from the library. Nothing fancy, but warm, quiet, and mine. There was a crooked little radiator that hissed in winter and a sunspot by the window where I read my paper every morning. I never imagined I'd give it up at 78 years old, but life has a funny way of humbling even the most careful planners. It started with a fall, nothing broken. Thank God, but enough to rattle me. I slipped while carrying groceries up the stairs and hit my hip hard. The doctor said I needed rest and help for a while. My savings had already been thinning after Roy passed, and with rent going up again, I was standing at the edge of choices I never thought I'd face. Kyle, my oldest, offered first. "Just come stay with us for a bit, Mom," he said over the phone, his voice full of that familiar, practical cheer. "You can rest up here. Brooke and I have plenty of space." It sounded like a blessing. I packed 2 suitcases, gave up the lease on my apartment, and moved into the guest room of their suburban home. Brooke greeted me politely, showed me where the towels were, and told me to make myself at home. I believed her. At first, everything was easy enough. I kept to myself, cooked dinner a few times a week, and even managed to fix a loose railing on their back porch. Roy would have been proud. Kyle would kiss my cheek in the mornings before work and say, "Glad you're here, Mom." But slowly, things began to change. It was subtle at first. Brooke started sighing more when I walked into the kitchen. She stopped inviting me to join their weekend brunches with her friends. When I asked once if I could bake something for Kyle's office potluck, she said flatly, "They usually cater that." Then added, without looking at me, "Plus, I don't think anyone there eats casseroles." Casseroles, it wasn't about the food. I kept brushing it off. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe she was just tired from work. But the comments kept coming, edged in something sharper. One afternoon, I folded their laundry and left it in neat piles on the couch. When Brooke came home, she stared at the clothes and said, "I wish people would ask before going through our stuff." That night, I sat in the guest room, lights off, listening to the hum of their dishwasher downstairs. The walls were thin. I heard Kyle laugh. I used to rock him to sleep when he had growing pains when monsters under the bed kept him up. He used to bury his face in my neck, whispering, "Don't go, Mama, stay." Now, he barely looked at me. When he did, it was like I wasn't there, like I was some smudge in the background of his life. They both said this was just until I got back on my feet. But lately, it felt like they were just waiting for me to trip again. And somewhere deep inside, I started to feel it too, that terrible, quiet truth: I was no longer welcome. But they had no idea, not yet, who really held the ground they stood on. It began with the teacups. One morning, I reached for the floral china set I'd brought from my old apartment, the same ones Roy bought me on our 25th anniversary, delicate and cream-colored with little blue violets along the rim. I'd used them for years, but that day when I set 2 cups on the table for tea, Brooke walked in and raised her eyebrows. "Oh," she said, half laughing. "Those, I thought we packed them away, we already have plenty of mugs." "They were just in the cabinet," I replied gently. She didn't answer. Just picked up her phone and walked out of the kitchen, shaking her head like I'd done something odd. That was the first time I felt the shift in the air. Small, but sharp. Later that week, I went to do laundry, something I'd been doing quietly every Tuesday since I moved in. I always waited until their loads were done, always used my own detergent. This time, as I reached to start the washer, Brooke stood in the doorway. "Hey," she said, folding her arms, "maybe just check with me before you use it. We're on a tight water budget this month." I blinked at her, unsure if I'd heard right. "I didn't think—" "It's fine," she cut me off, walking away. "Just, common courtesy." Courtesy. That word sat with me all afternoon. I'd spent my life practicing it, teaching Kyle to say please and thank you, writing thank you cards after funerals, keeping casseroles warm in the oven for neighbors going through hard times. But here, in this house I helped build with my husband's 2 hands, I was being told to ask permission to wash my own clothes. Then came the day I found my sewing basket in the garage. I'd kept it tucked neatly in the guest room closet, same place since I arrived. But one afternoon, I went to grab a needle and thread and found the closet empty. After 20 minutes of searching, I opened the garage door and there it was, stacked with some of my books, a folded quilt, and 2 boxes labeled in Brooke's handwriting, "Mom's stuff." When I asked Kyle about it, he gave a sheepish smile. Brooke was just clearing out a bit of space. The guest closet was getting cluttered. Cluttered? I asked, voice quiet. You know what I mean, Mom, no big deal. But it was a big deal. It was my life, slowly being boxed up and pushed out of sight like I was already halfway gone. And yet, I said nothing. Until one night, I heard the truth I hadn't wanted to face. They thought I was asleep. I usually was by that hour. But the headache that night wouldn't let me rest, so I wandered out to the kitchen for some water. Their voices stopped me halfway down the hall. The door to their bedroom was cracked open, and I heard Brooke's voice first, low and tense. She's always here, Kyle. Always. In the kitchen, in the laundry room, just hovering. I need my space. She's not doing it on purpose, Kyle said, but his voice lacked conviction. She's just old. She was only supposed to stay for a few weeks. It's been almost 9 months. A pause, then Kyle sighed. I know, we'll talk to her. She can't stay forever. I stood there frozen, hand trembling around the glass of water. I wasn't crying, not yet. The tears would come later, quietly, beneath the thin blanket in the guest room. But in that moment, something inside me shifted. This house, the floors my husband laid with his own hands, the porch he built from reclaimed cedar, the land he left behind with pride, it wasn't just theirs. It was mine, and they had forgotten that. Or maybe they never really knew. It happened on a Sunday. The kind of day that used to mean something in our house. Roast chicken in the oven, the hum of football on the TV, Kyle curled on the couch with his socks half off like he was still 10 years old. Now the house felt sterile. Too quiet. As if everyone was just waiting for something to end. Kyle came into the guest room mid-morning. Knocked once, then pushed the door open before I could answer. His hands were tucked into his hoodie pockets, eyes darting like a boy who'd lost his nerve halfway through a lie. Hey, Mom, can we talk for a second? I sat on the edge of the bed, folded my hands neatly in my lap. Of course, sweetheart. He didn't sit. Just paced. You've been here for a while now, he started. Almost 8 months, right? I nodded gently. That sounds about right. You said it was just until you got back on your feet. I did. He glanced toward the door, as if hoping Brooke might appear and finish this for him. When she didn't, he exhaled and looked back at me. It's just we really need our space back. You know, for the kids. I tilted my head. You don't have kids. His jaw tensed. Yeah, but we're thinking about it. And Brooke's been saying it's hard to relax with, well, it's a full house, that's all. I let his words settle. Not with anger, not with tears. Just a quiet sort of disappointment that lands like a cold stone in your stomach, the kind you can't throw away or swallow, only carry. I looked him squarely in the eyes and asked, Where do you think I should go? He blinked. I mean, there are options. You could maybe get a small apartment again, or there are programs for. Like senior living, you'd have your own space. That's when Brooke finally joined him, arms crossed over a spotless cardigan. There are government-assisted homes, she added quickly. Nice ones, actually, and we'd help you research. Help me research, as if I were a project, a task, a misplaced item to be returned to its rightful place. I looked at them both, my son, who I had once held through fevers and broken hearts, and the woman he chose, who now spoke to me like a social worker. I took a breath and said calmly, That's fine, I'll figure something out. Kyle seemed surprised. Brooke looked relieved, and I stood, smoothed my skirt, and walked past them down the hallway. But what they didn't know, what neither of them had ever asked about, was who actually owned the very ground beneath this house. Roy and I had bought this land in 1986, 3 long acres just outside of town, back when it was still mostly gravel roads and thistle bushes. He was a contractor, clever with his hands, frugal with his money. We built our home slowly, summer by summer, board by board. When Kyle graduated college, we offered to let him and Brooke build a small house on the back end of the land as a wedding gift. Roy helped pour the foundation himself. We didn't charge them a cent. Not for the land, not for the labor. It was a gesture, a legacy. But what Kyle never knew was that the property had always been in my name. It was Roy's idea years ago for tax reasons, protection, just in case. We never switched it after he died. Never had a reason to, and I never mentioned it, not even when Kyle moved in. Not when they built the guest house. Not when Brooke started shuffling my things into the garage like I was already halfway gone. But I hadn't forgotten. No, I had just been quiet. Now, for the first time in a long while, I felt that quiet shifting into something stronger. Something like resolve. The next morning, I went into town and stopped by the county clerk's office. The woman at the desk, Clara, remembered me from church. I filled out a form, waited 10 minutes, and walked out with a crisp certified copy of the deed. Property owner, Margaret Alois Hartman, all 3 acres. Every tree, every fence post, every inch of the soil Kyle's house stood on. Still mine. I folded the document carefully into my purse, the weight of it lighter than I expected, yet heavier in meaning than anything I'd carried in years. It wasn't about punishment. It wasn't even about pride. It was about remembering who I was and reminding them who I had always been. After I left the county clerk's office, I didn't go straight home. I stopped at a small law firm on Main Street, tucked between the bakery and a locksmith that hadn't been open in years. The bell above the door jingled softly as I entered, and a young man in a trim gray suit looked up from his desk. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I smiled politely and placed the deed on his desk. "I just need to make sure this still means what I think it means." His name was Thomas Rowe, newly minted, no older than Kyle. He took his time reviewing the paperwork, cross-checking dates, parcel numbers, and survey maps. After 30 minutes, he looked up, adjusting his glasses. "Well, Miss Hartman, there's no question. This entire property, all 3 acres, is legally yours. No liens, no transfers, and the house your son lives in, it's on your land." I nodded once. "Can I ask you to put that in writing, official language, something firm?" He raised an eyebrow but didn't question me. "Of course." We drafted a letter together. Clear, unemotional, stamped with his firm's seal. It stated that I was the sole legal owner of the property and that the structure erected on it was not separate in title. It concluded with a 30-day notice to vacate, effective immediately. I took it home, folded it neatly, and slipped it into a plain white envelope along with a certified copy of the deed and the lawyer's letter. I addressed it to Kyle and Brooke Hartman and placed a single stamp on the corner. Then I walked it out to the mailbox myself. The flag went up, and I went back inside to make dinner. The next morning, I made French toast, Kyle's favorite growing up. I even sprinkled cinnamon on top, just the way he liked it. I was flipping the last slice when I heard the front door swing open fast and hard. Heavy footsteps thundered into the kitchen. Kyle's voice cracked through the air like a whip. "Are you serious right now?" I didn't turn around. Just plated the toast, poured my tea, and sat down at the table. Kyle stood in the doorway, cheeks flushed, gripping the letter in his hand like it was a live wire. Brooke hovered behind him, pale and silent. "You're evicting us. You can't do this." I took a calm sip of my tea. "Actually, I can," he laughed, high bitter. "This is insane. You're my mother." "And you told your mother she couldn't stay here anymore," I said gently. "I'm simply respecting your wishes." His mouth opened, then closed again. The air shifted, not angry now, but stunned. "I thought this was our land," he said. "You and Dad gave it to us." "We let you build on it," I corrected. "But we never transferred the title. Your father always said some gifts should remain acts of grace, not contracts." Brooke finally found her voice. "But this is our home." I looked at her, not unkindly. "It was mine first. Roy and I cleared every rock on this ground with our bare hands. I held Kyle on this porch when he was a baby. I planted the pear tree in the back. You've called it home for 8 years. I've called it mine for nearly 40. Kyle's face darkened. "So that's it? You're just kicking us out?" "No," I said. "I'm setting boundaries. You wanted me gone. You made that clear." He flinched. Maybe he hadn't realized how cruel those words sounded out loud. "Consider this," I added, "me honoring that request." I stood, steady and calm. My voice didn't rise. My hands didn't shake. "For 8 months I lived here with you. I stayed quiet. I kept out of your way. And when you decided I was inconvenient, you asked me to leave." I tapped the deed gently on the table between us. "And now I am." They didn't say much after that. Kyle stomped back to his room. Brooke followed, arms crossed. The letter stayed on the table, untouched but loud in its silence. I cleaned the kitchen slowly, humming an old song I hadn't heard in years. For the first time in months, maybe years, the house felt peaceful again. Not because I had won anything, but because I had finally remembered what I still owned, my place. My voice. My worth. The days that followed were quiet, but not peaceful. The kind of quiet that settles between people like a thick, unspoken fog, no words, only tension humming beneath the surface. Kyle barely looked at me. Brooke moved around the house with red-rimmed eyes and a silence that spoke louder than her usual sharpness ever had. Then, on the 5th evening after the letter arrived, they knocked on my door together. Kyle stood stiffly. Brooke held a tissue in her hand, already damp. Can we talk? He asked. I closed the book on my lap and nodded. They sat across from me on the love seat, the same one Roy and I had picked out 20 years ago from a scratch and dent sail. Funny how time turns things sentimental. I just don't understand, Kyle began, his voice tight. After everything I've done for you? I tilted my head, not angry, just curious. Everything? He hesitated. We took you in, we let you stay here, we made room for you. I folded my hands, keeping my tone even. You mean when I gave up my apartment and came here to recover at your invitation? Brooke jumped in, tears spilling. We didn't mean for it to go this way. I didn't want to hurt you. I looked at her. And yet, you did. Her lip trembled. I was just overwhelmed. I wanted a normal house again. I didn't mean to make you feel like a burden. But that's exactly how I'd felt. I let the silence stretch, not as punishment, but as space. Sometimes people need to hear themselves think. Kyle softened next. Isn't there any way we can fix this? I exhaled slowly, gently. You want to fix it now that the house is at risk, not when you boxed up my things without asking, not when you said I couldn't stay, not when you suggested senior homes like I was furniture that didn't match the Dacre. Brooke sobbed harder. Kyle reached for my hand, I let him. I didn't know, he whispered. I didn't realize what it looked like. I raised you better than this, I said, not cruelly, but plainly. You know I did. I looked at him then, really looked, and saw not a man, not a husband or a homeowner, but the boy I once knew. The boy who scraped his knees riding his bike too fast on the gravel. The one who used to beg me for another 5 minutes of piano practice, just so he could stay up a little later. The boy who clung to me for dear life when Roy died, both of us broken in different ways, learning how to walk again with only each other to lean on. I remembered working double shifts just to afford those piano lessons, skipping meals so he could have new shoes for school, reading bedtime stories until my voice cracked and my eyes blurred, and never once regretting it. I gave him everything. And now I was being treated like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. It hurt. God, it hurt, but pain doesn't mean you back down from the truth. I stood slowly and looked down at them. I'm not doing this to hurt you, I said, but I will not let you forget what I gave, what this land meant, what I meant. Kyle stood too, trembling a little. So you're really going through with it? I nodded. You asked me to leave, I'm leaving, and I'm asking you to do the same. They didn't scream, they didn't slam doors, there were no dramatics, no thrown words, just tears. Just two people realizing too late what kindness they'd mistaken for weakness. And me? I didn't scream, I didn't punish. I just enforced the boundary they drew first. Because sometimes, the greatest act of love is refusing to let someone hurt you twice. By the time the 30 days were up, the house was quiet again, but this time, it was a different kind of quiet. Not tense, not bitter. Just still. Kyle and Brooke packed up slowly, trying not to meet my eyes. I didn't interfere. I didn't gloat. I helped carry a few boxes to the car, placed a folded dish towel in the kitchen drawer, and ran my hand along the doorframe one last time. They didn't say much when they left. Brooke whispered, "I'm sorry," through the window as they drove off. Kyle nodded once. I gave a soft wave, then turned back toward the porch, not with sadness, but with something close to relief. The house wasn't perfect. The walls needed paint, the floors were scratched, and the roof had a slow leak that Roy would have fixed in an afternoon. But it was mine. I hired a contractor the following week, local, fair, kind man named Harris who used to work with Roy back in the day. We replaced the porch steps, repainted the guest room, and even fixed the garden gate Brooke always complained about but never touched. During the renovations, I found a quiet listing on a church bulletin board. Single mother of two seeking safe home. Reliable, church-going, no pets. Her name was Marissa. She worked nights at the diner and homeschooled her oldest during the day. The minute we spoke, I knew. She reminded me of myself, tired but strong, stretched thin but full of warmth. I didn't charge her market rate, just enough to cover taxes and upkeep. She cried when I handed her the keys. I told her gently, "Take care of this place. It has good bones and better memories." As for me, I moved into a little 2-bedroom cottage not far from the edge of the property, just past the old pear tree Roy planted the spring before he died. I can see it from the front porch now, green and swaying, just as stubborn and steady as I always tried to be. My days are quiet, peaceful. I read more. I volunteer at the library. Sometimes I bake bread just for the smell of it, then give it away to neighbors who smile too wide and tell me they never met someone who could make cinnamon swirl taste like forgiveness. I walk the land every morning, not because I'm watching over it, but because it still feels like mine. They said I didn't belong, but I was here long before the walls rose, before the garden grew, before their son took his first breath. This was always my home. I just forgot for a while. You can't stay here anymore, he said. I smiled. That's fine, I own the deed.